Welcome everyone. I see everyone joining us right now, and we'll get started in just a few moments. But in the meantime, please, we invite you to write in the chat box who you are and where you are joining us from. And please also make sure that you select your language. So everyone, please select a language, whether you are planning to listen in English or French, to ensure that you're able to listen to all of our speakers. To select a language, please click on the bottom where you can see the globe icon, and it will take you to the English or French channel. You can then mute the original audio. And again, please select your language, whether you are listening in English or French. Our next slide will show you a visual representation of where you can find the globe icon at the bottom of your screen. And we've also shared a few poll questions that we encourage you to respond to while we wait for others to join. And this will be in English and in French on the next slide to read the poll questions. And then you'll note in the poll that the answer choices are in both English and French as well. We've also added the poll questions in French to the chat as well, if you'd like to read them there. And if you're just joining us, we'll get started in a few moments. As we're waiting for others to join, please make sure that you select your language option. To do so, you can click on the globe icon at the bottom, and it will take you to either the English or French channel. And then you can mute the original audio. A reminder that everyone will need to select their language, whether you're listening in English or French, to ensure that you're able to listen to all of our speakers. We've also shared a few poll questions as well. You can read both English and French on the slide. And you'll note that the answer choices have also been entered in English and French as well. If you'd like to read them in the chat, we've also added the French version, the French translation of the poll questions to the chat as well. All right, thank you again for joining us today. I want to welcome everyone again to today's session. We're so excited that you're here. My name is Brittany Getch, and I'm a program officer on the Knowledge Success Project at Johns Hopkins Center for Communication Programs. Knowledge Success is excited to be partnering with FP 2020 on this webinar series. And this is our 7th session in the Connecting Conversations series. If you missed the sessions in the first module, you can watch the webinar recordings and get up to speed. Those are posted on the FP 2020 YouTube site, and we're also publishing blog posts on the Knowledge Success site where you can find those links, as well as read summaries from previous conversations. This webinar will last for approximately an hour, and we'll have a Q&A discussion with our 3 speakers. This webinar is being simultaneously interpreted into French, as I mentioned, and it's being recorded in both English and French. Those recordings will be available in the coming days. Participants are muted throughout the duration of the session, but if you have questions for our speakers, please type them in the chat box as you follow along. And my Knowledge Success and FP 2020 colleagues will be moderating the chat box, and we'll get to as many questions as time allows. Just a little bit about this Connecting Conversations series in case you're joining us for the first time. Connecting Conversations is a series of discussions on adolescent and youth reproductive health hosted by FP 2020 and Knowledge Success. Through the middle of next year, we'll be co-hosting these sessions every few weeks on a variety of topics. But this is not your traditional webinar series. We're using a more conversational style, encouraging open dialogue, and allowing plenty of time for questions to guarantee that you'll be coming back for more. The series has been divided into 5 modules, and our first one, which focused on a foundational understanding of adolescent development and health, started on July 15th and concluded on September 9th. Our second module is focusing on parents, preachers, partners, and phones, engaging critical influencers to improve young people's reproductive health. And first, I'm pleased to introduce our moderator for today's session on preachers, Kate Plord. Kate Plord is a technical advisor at FHI 360, where her work focuses on gender and adolescent and youth health and development. She is a member of the Knowledge Success team. So Kate, I will hand it over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Brittany, for that introduction. And we are so excited to welcome all of you to our second webinar in the second module of this series. Today, we are joined by Jackie Katana, the Executive Chairperson and Founding Director of the Faith for Family Health Initiative in Uganda. She has 17 years of experience working with interfaith organizations and religious leaders to advance reproductive health investments and policy at the subnational, national, and international levels. We Prabhu Deepan, who is the head of Tear Fund's global thematic support team based in Colombo, Sri Lanka. He is the architect of Tear Fund's evidence-based Transforming Masculinities intervention, a faith-based approach implemented in 12 countries, including adaptations focused specifically on family planning. And finally, we have Fatou Diop, the youth focal point in Senegal for the Ouagadougou and FP 2020 partnership. She leads communication for the 20% Initiative project, launched by the National for Reproductive Health and Family Planning. She has a bachelor's degree in political science and a master's degree in population development and health. So we welcome our 3 panelists, and we're delighted to have this conversation this morning. So a reminder to please choose whether you would like to be on the French or English channel and mute your original audio. So this topic is so important and so timely. And before we dive into a discussion about effective approaches, it's important for us to define what we really mean by faith-based programming and why it's so important. We often hear faith-based programming for adolescent reproductive health promoted as a promising strategy. Yet this term encompasses many possible activities. So my first question to the panelists is this. When you hear the term faith-based programming, what are we really talking about today?
Bonjour à tous.
Bonjour, Fatou.
Hello, everyone. Hello, Fatou.
Good morning to panelists and good morning to those who are listening. I hope that you can hear me. When I hear about faith-based programming, these are programs that respect each person's values. These are programs that are not going to counter religious beliefs. They take into account the religious beliefs and values of each person. For me, this is very important, and this is a very important aspect of faith-based programs, that they are going to take into account the values of the different societies and different religious groups. Our faith-based programs try not to shock people. So if we shock people, we will never achieve our goals. It is very important for these faith-based programs that we don't shock people or go against their values. I don't believe that faith-based organizations are necessarily inherently against family planning, and I think that it is important to encourage their participation.
Thank you. Once again, I'm Jackie. Greetings to all the viewers and the panelists. When we talk about faith-based programming, is basically hinging all the program work we do, but for our case here, adolescent and youth programming, on around 5 pillars. Some of them Fatou already mentioned, but one, these are programs that are hinged on religious and faith structures. What do I mean by the structures? These are the events, these are the ministries, these are the departments, these are the different activities that happen in those religious institutions and their events. It also requires working with faith and religious leaders, because when you talk about human resource, those are the core people. They are the custodians of the values that she talked about. It's about building our programming around values, canons, and beliefs, as well as the principles of the faith, of the different faith, and respecting them. It's about applying, when I talked about the canons, I'll be direct, scriptures. If they are Christians, what does the Bible say about, for example, adolescents and the youth? If they are Muslims or Islam, Hindu, what do they say about the youth? What do they say about issues affecting young people? But above all, in Uganda, we've added there another pillar, that is applying scientific approaches in line with the above pillars. And that one I'll expound further when we are talking about some of the key issues that emerge. And it's very core. In Uganda, where I come from, over 89% of
Jackie, we seem to have lost you for a moment.
close to 90 of Ugandans are religious. So wherever you go, you're working with faith.
Thank you, Jackie. Prabhu, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think in addition to what Fatou and Jackie have said, I guess the important part in our kind of experience around defining faith-based interventions have been that religious and faith leaders have been integral to the process and sit within the process itself, acknowledging that they themselves are on this journey to understand and unlearn and relearn. And therefore engaging with theology, scriptures, text, and practices are really important. Also acknowledging that, you know, in most contexts that we work in, it is very difficult to, differentiate culture from religion, because I think they're so intertwined, and therefore the need to address and work with those framing. And I guess it's also important to, acknowledge what Fatou said. We acknowledge that faith is an important part of people's lives, and faith leaders hold this, a critical place in community life and in people's personal and family life, etc. So I think acknowledging all of these realities that we sit the work that we do within the framework of their understanding or the parameters of their faith and text, and our starting point being that, as we also accompany these religious leaders on their own personal journey as well.
Great, thank you, Prabhu. And we have a question in the chat box about if the approaches differs by the type of religion, Islam, Christianity, does it differ the direction of the organization?
In our experience, we have an ongoing work in Nigeria where we're working with Islamic communities and Christian communities together. And I guess, each of our work has required significant adaptation while the principles remain. I think for us, it has been really important to articulate the principles that we are coming together on and agree upon. How we outwork those principles differ based on the community and the practices in their local communities. And I think it will be the same in terms of working with Christians in West African context to Christian in South Asian context. And then, even within Christians, there are so many denominations. I think it requires a level of adaptation, but acknowledging and agreeing on certain principles, I think, key in doing so. So yes, some of the processes differ, and I will talk about some of them, maybe in my explanation, sharing examples of our work. But yeah, of course, I think so.
Thank you,
I
Prabhu.
can't agree more. It's about understanding each of their values and contextualizing them within the programs that we do, and seeking consensus and forming a position on how you should advance. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you, Jackie. And Fatou, I see you are nodding.
Yes, I fully agree with what Prabhu just said. Indeed, one must recognize the specificity of each religious group. There are some points where things will be different between Muslims and Christians or Hindus. It won't be the same. So for each group, we need to go in depth and gauge the differences, because we will not be able to treat all the groups the same way. So in each case, we need to go more in depth to determine the differences in order to adapt accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you all. And I think what's so important and what's really coming across clearly is that this approach really requires, as Fatou stated at the beginning, values across all religions. And so my question is, why is this important? Why is it important to consider engaging religious leaders and other faith-based organizations or networks for adolescent and reproductive health? What are the unique benefits of this approach?
Thank you. I'll start by saying that religion, as we already said, is part and parcel of the life, daily life of most of the people. So the issues we address in programming affect the faith communities and even the religious leaders themselves. So it's very important that they're part and parcel of the whole process. But more so, faith-based institutions, faith communities have audiences. So if you really want to pass out messages, in most of the countries where I come from, there are structures of the main faith that run from national up to the grassroots. In some faith, like the Catholic, they run right from Rome, international, up to the grassroots. and they meet audiences throughout the week. Every time they are meeting someone, they have the trust. They are trusted. This has worked for us so much in advocacy. Trust, influence, and platform. It can take us the shortest time ever to meet the most important decision maker. Even convening different beneficiaries, different decision makers, because they are respected, they are trusted, people believe in them, and they have the platform. So it's very, very crucial that we engage them and we later discuss how best we can do that. Over to you.
Thank you. And just to add to what Jackie is saying, acknowledging that, you know, religion and religious leaders, or faith and faith leaders, are an important part of people's lives, and especially when it comes to adolescents, and especially on particular issues related to sexual reproductive health, etc., reproductive health. And I think it's also important to acknowledge how they are key reference groups or influential people in terms of certain, you know, behaviors. And if we do not work with them in a way that is collaborative and they understand, I think it is easy for some of the misconceptions around the work that we do that could act as barriers, especially with them. So I think they are an important partner in terms of, you know, because the faith leaders have a mandate in some ways to look at the holistic development of human beings, and at least that's what most of the religious text talks about. It's the holistic well-being of individuals, and when it comes to certain conversations and topics, I think they hold a special kind of place in people's lives. There's a moral question, and I think it's really important that we engage with that, and specifically for young people. Therefore, they become a critical reference group or people, a partner in this process.
Thank you, Prabhu. I think that is such an important point and relevant for the first question we had for the poll about whether or not adolescent health programs have similar goals as faith-based organizations and religion. And I think you've demonstrated for us in your comments that they in fact do have similar goals. Fatou, please.
Yes, allow me to say a few words. As was said by my colleagues, the involvement of the faith leaders is important. Looking at the case of Senegal, the majority is Muslim. 95% of 95% of the population is Muslim, and we have two largest brotherhoods. Faith-based leaders have had a very important part to play, including influencing a lot of political decisions, determining who was going to be elected. Hence the importance of the weight of these faith-based people at the national level. It is clear that if we want a program to succeed today, we must work with the religious leaders so that the program can get to the grassroots level, because the population listens to the faith-based leaders. Today in Senegal, even for any effort that we have to go through the religious leaders, because if we go through the religious leader to plead for instance, in favor of family planning, if the religious leaders share our idea, if they agree with us with that message, we will then get the decision makers on board for the programs on reproductive health in general. Thank you.
Thank you, Fatou, Prabhu, and Jackie. Knowing that this is such an important group to engage, I'm wondering, what are some specific strategies that you all have found to be very helpful for engaging these stakeholders around specifically adolescent reproductive health?
Thank you very much. One of the key entry and very important strategies, capacity building. Most of these religious and faith leaders, their background, they were trained to be theologians, they were trained to master the Bible, they were trained to master the Quran. Even when they have these structures, we already talked about goals, similar goals. They have youth ministries, they have youth events. But when they go for those events, how much knowledge do they have? They have their own package. But how much do we want them to add on that package that they initially designed in their institutions? So in Uganda, we actually called it champion building. So we build their capacity in adolescent and youth issues, take them through the legal and policy framework, disagree and agree on conflicting values, and eventually form a position of how they want to advance and collaborate with other partners. We also use interfaith approach. We don't work with individual institutions, we bring them together. Even when they have shared values, there's where their values are a little different. I'll give you an example. Family planning, mainly in Uganda, but also elsewhere, is not very much receptive for young people, but more so even contraception, modern contraception, even in adults. So how do you bring them together? And the Catholics will tell you, for us, we are going to go use natural family planning, and that's how we want to do it, and this is what we would like to do. What about the position of others? So it's very important that they come together as interfaith and they realize their common goals and interests and agree on their roles as an interfaith team. Because if you don't do that, then any controversy will scare them away. We also bring them together. After forming consensus position, we find a way of getting them work with other collaborators, actors, and like civil society organizations, the young people themselves. I'll talk about this in the strategies later, but it's very important that I say it now, that right from the beginning, you need to make sure that religious leaders, faith institutions are working hand in hand with adolescents. Because if they don't agree to work together from the beginning and disagree and form a position, then it becomes very difficult along the way when you're doing programming. So I would use an ordinary word. You have to buddy them. They have to be buddies, to agree and disagree, and then let agree to work together. Thank you.
One thing that we have learned is that we can support them, we can contribute to their capacity building, and one thing that we must do is that we can have these exchanges, we can share all of these arguments and this information that we have already discussed. We often invite religious leaders, and we carry out events on different platforms like Facebook Live. So we'll have a Facebook Live meeting, and this way we'll be able to present discussions led by religious leaders. And we'll be able to talk about how we move from one point to another. So these are some events that are very interesting. And we know that we need religious leaders to encourage these movements.
Fatu, I am so sorry, but we had an issue with the translation at the beginning of your statement, and so I'm wondering if you could please just repeat the start of your statement.
Yes, of course. What I was saying is that a strategy that we have implemented is to support religious leaders to develop different arguments and to develop a presentation to support family planning initiatives. So we were able to really define what different religions had said about family planning and reproductive health. So this is an argument that we use today, and this is a document that we use today to reach out to different religious leaders and different people. So we are able to say to people, this is exactly what religion has said about this topic. Sometimes when we, as a youth organization, we are able to help support religious organizations to carry out different activities. We see them as partners. They're very much partners with whom we can work, and we can develop different projects and programs. Another thing is that we can provide technical support. For example, we have a great deal of knowledge, and we know what tools you can use, and we also know more about the youth reproductive and sexual health. So we know that we can support them for these goals. That is a strategy that we have implemented very successfully. Another strategy is that we are putting these initiatives at the foundation of the programs. So we work with them from the very beginning of different programs. So we want to know what the religious point of view would be about our program, because we know if we don't have their support, then we won't be as successful. We know that if we are going against religious values, our initiative is never going to succeed. So we try to work with them. We try to involve them at every level of each program. Today, we have developed a partnership, and we work a great deal with religious leaders. They're involved in every program that we implement. We do lots of Facebook Lives, for example, with religious leaders. We know that many of our target audience have accounts on Facebook, so they're often there. And so we host these discussions, we ask them specific questions, we ask them about family planning initiatives. So we want to present the religious point of view about the topics that are important to us. So we ask them questions about sexual and reproductive health. And so we hear what exactly they present in the Quran or in the Bible.
Thanks, Kate. Can I add something? Or yeah, for our, in our experience with working with faith leaders, and I can see a couple of comments as well. Just we with Tear Fund have been able to develop this process called transforming masculinities, which is I would say a faith-based approach on working on gender equality and positive masculinities. And I think I was saying that it has been adapted to include family planning. This work has been going on in DRC and in Nigeria. For us, what has been really helpful is that it's a form of collaboration and partnership and agreeing on our common goals. I think we need to go beyond the mobilizing faith leaders for our agenda framing of partnerships. Sometimes we give them a book and say that, talk about this. They will talk about it in the programming context, but then it is not ingrained in the way they live out and teach their faith. For us, then it was important to deal with, engage in social norms. I would always say, we take them through a 3-day workshop or a 6-week process, and that's it for the rest of their lives. There's no incentive, and what gets reinforced is sometimes contrary to what we have, we believe together. So I think articulating common goals and agreeing together, this is where we are starting to work with, and co-creating the agenda. And I think in some places, finding ways to talk about things that don't feel quite sensitive, like for example, language. In terms of in the Nigerian context, one of the things that the Islamic leader said to us, they don't prefer the word family planning, but birth spacing is more acceptable to them. So talking about using the language to and because of some sensitivities, then you can't move forward. So acknowledging and creating that language and the framing, and in a part of our process is about dialogues with men and women in the congregations and the mosques, and in the Islamic settings, men and women don't come together. So it's about adaptation. How do we adapt in a place? And they themselves the leaders themselves became active partners in terms of helping us think about and design the solutions that work for them, rather than us kind of creating those solutions from them. And also it's around accompaniment. They are religious leaders, and our language is so developmental. So I think it's really important to acknowledge that you're not just really imposing a value on people. And I think there's a in our work, at least, we articulate the process of what we mean by family planning. I think there's an idea that it is about limiting the number of children that you have to 2, or, I think it's really creating a wider awareness of how you make those decisions, the decision-making processes, and, and the considerations around that. Even the scripture that somebody has quoted, like, around be fruitful and multiply, and what that means. And I think it's really important to find allies within the religious leaders as well, people who are part of that community and championing this work. You would be surprised to know that we are not the first ones to talk about, you like to take credit the development sector about these themes within those sectors. We are not pioneers. There are people who are actively working within the spaces as well. So it's partnering alongside of them as well. And I think it's really important to acknowledge that. And then scriptures. I think it's like, Catherine had quoted here. We have to engage with some of these scriptures. Doing away with that, it just means that it gets reinforced in different ways. I think rethinking and re-understanding scriptures in a way that it is meaningful. And I think as a programmatic person, you can't do that. So we really partner with theological institutions or others who understand theology and respect it in their context, so that we can articulate that and re-understand some of these scriptures in a better and a contextual sense. Process is important. Diffusion is important. Think social norms. Think about how do these messages get diffused. Faith communities have captive audiences, and most of their work is beyond just the 4 walls of their mosques or churches or temples. I think it's really acknowledging that their reach is wide, and they're able to set a role model and diffuse messages, either in a way that is for adolescents, reproductive health, or against adolescent reproductive health. I guess it's really about creating clarity in terms of what we talk about, and continuous engagement in the process, so that they understand this is what we are doing together. So that there's less room for misinterpretation of what we are doing, and at the community level. I think it just allows us to journey together in a better sense. I think these are kind of some of our experience, at least in terms of how we've engaged with them, and I think it's worked. And I'm happy to share some resources later with the organizers, so they can circulate them as well if you want to hear more.
Thank you. I would like to add a few things. And some of them will touch on some of the questions on the chat. One, we talked about returning internal advocacy with these different faiths and their leaders to be able to appreciate and agree on different positions. This answers the question where we are saying, how do we deal with a different faith? But also, Prabhu talked about external advocacy. There's phobia. The public, the civil society, they blame religious leaders, and also religious leaders blame them. Media misquote them. They end up not agreeing on a common position. And that's why he talked about the issue of the language. So how do we bring all of them on the table to understand each other, so that they know how we can work together, they can work together? The other key strategy is evidence generation and facts. What we've discovered, actually, before we do any piece of work here, we have to carry out studies and research. And as part of the training of these religious leaders, we are giving them the situation and also we are giving them the context, we are making them understand the facts. Give them adequate information that equip them and empowers them to be able to program. Let it be advocacy, they'll need evidence. And they've done it so well, they speak with a lot of authority once empowered. Using their structures, they're able to integrate and mainstream like experts. So evidence generation, providing information, capacity building, and also enhancing collaboration and partnerships, because there's a lot of blame game. In Uganda, we are among the first organizations who are piloting this project with support from Population Action International. and they could not believe that civil society organizations, decision makers, young people, and interfaith religious leaders could sit on one table. We've just piloted it, and now we are going to roll it out in many districts and at national level. But I can tell you it works, but it requires understanding the dynamics. It requires first dealing with them internally and agreeing on positions of how you need to advance. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for those comments. And as we're talking about acknowledging language, finding shared values, I see that there's a comment in the text box or in the chat box about what do we do in the case specifically of adolescent reproductive health when we're talking about unmarried adolescents, and there may be several religions that are promoting abstinence among this group. What specific strategies have you seen that have worked, and how do we sort of deal with this potential value clash?
I think, you know, the programming context has mattered a lot. I think I wanted to acknowledge also, like in most of the countries that we work in, some of the religious institutions run hospitals, schools, you know, and you also family planning clinics. In most of the places, you know, some of the work that I'm doing in DRC and in Nigeria, some of the clinics are actually run by faith leaders and communities, and they provide counseling, family planning counseling, you know, modern contraceptives, etc. as well. So I think that's something to acknowledge, that the faith community is not a homogeneous group. You know, there are varying beliefs across each religion and within the religion as well. And I guess in terms of the abstinence only, there are other programs, like I think World Vision came up with safer practices, and I think, you know, they use HIV as an entry point in the working around in the work with young people, you know, because it was initially ABC, you know, abstain, be faithful. They went into safer practices, mutually agreed decision making. I can't remember what the acronym stood for, but it was more around informed decisions and mutual consent. You know, I think so. I think there are organizations that have succeeded in terms of addressing either, you know, use of countering some of the abstinence only programming, moving away from the ABC to, I think it's called SAFE or SAVE, you know, safer practices. And I think it's again, like most of the, you know, I think obviously today's conversations around religious leaders, and I think you will find this is a point of contention with parents as well. You know, it's finding a common ground in terms of how we want to work on this conversation. The fact of the matter is that most people are sexually active, young adolescents sexually active, and they are uninformed. I think it's really important, you know, framing the language, and I think entry point matters in terms of how we work with any target audience, and specifically with religious leaders as well. What is our entry point into these conversations? If it is the well-being of the young people and adolescents, then we start working as the point of entry. And I think this relates to the comment from Eric as well. There are religious leaders who use scriptures to malign on AYRH topics. True. I think that's our strategy has been in terms of focusing on scriptures that actually enable us to, you know, continue this dialogue. Because there's, you know, like text, it's all up to interpretation, one interpretation over the other. I think it's creating a common interpretation in that space has been really helpful for us. I will probably share, you know, I think Catherine had asked about evidence. I can talk about it a little bit more, but I think this is what I want to say. It is not straightforward, acknowledging that, and I acknowledge that it's not straightforward, you know, even other groups, at least in my experience. But I think we find entry points, and we've started, you know, working along that side in terms of, and partnering with those who are already active in this space. And most of the, you know, historically, most of the work around HIV, around that framing, family planning, has been a good entry points into talking about reproductive health with young adolescents.
I just would like to add one point, that once you provide evidence and they understand the magnitude of the challenge, they actually request and ask support in that area. In Uganda, that's how we've started adolescent health. It was never our agenda. We started with family planning, and we used the AFP SMART approach to train religious leaders, equipped them with enough knowledge. And in one of the meetings, they said, we are wasting time. We are wasting time with teenage pregnancy in Uganda, which is over 25%. What is our role here? And that's what we used to convince Population Action International that we need to take this agenda beyond family planning and go on to adolescent health. We even have a clip, we can share it, where the Deputy Mufti of Uganda was clearly saying we should not bury our heads in the sand. The problem is here. And COVID has also actually exposed and magnified the challenge that we cannot hide anymore. But of course, the values remain, only that they leave an opening. In most cases, just like Prabhu said, they will say, this is a position, we don't believe in premarital abstinence, blah, blah. But as advised by the doctors, where there is a need, and already they have facilities. And in these facilities, they are healthy, youth-friendly corners. So when they go there, they are not going with a priest and the imams. Then they are able. So there's an opening, and they've recognized that there is need. However, there are very few who can openly stand. But in Uganda, we've had some who have openly said, we don't need to bury our head. We need to give guidance, and where need be, we need to start thinking about certain modern approaches. Thank you.
Thank you, Jackie. And Fatou, would you like to add?
Yes, if I may. Let me pick up where Jackie stopped. What matters is to see where the reality is. And a great number of our religious concepts are premarital abstinence, but family planning is not limited to distribute the pill. It's a matter of communication. The religious leaders are not closed to sexuality and reproductive health. So communication is important for the adolescents and youth in our context. We still have a lot of early marriages. These adolescents can be actually married. And when they are married, it's a little easier to convince the religious leaders to join us, particularly for birth spacing. In terms of education on family planning, and I'm talking about adolescents that are married. They are married, but they're very, very young. The implications, the obstacles to get family planning services are considerable. So we need to be able to convince the religious authorities to be on our side to help at least the adolescents that are married. Now, for those adolescents that are not married, there is a lot to do. Education, sex education. Religions are not against the education element.
Thank you all. These are really great responses. And we've had a question in the chat box about providing a specific anecdote. So I'd like for each of you to give the opportunity to each of you to describe how you've achieved success, with a specific program or with a given congregation.
Kate, I can start off. Just the two projects that I was mentioning about, both of them are randomized controlled trials. One is in Kinshasa and one is in Nigeria. The one in Kinshasa is specifically only among Protestant communities, and then the one in Nigeria is with 10 Islamic communities and 10 Christian communities. And what we've seen at the end line is that around increase of uptake of modern family planning methods. And so I think it's the report is available on our Passages Consortium website. So I think you can have access to the end line report of the one in Kinshasa. So we actually can see increase in access to modern family planning services and methods, use of that. The caveat here is that the framing of the project is they are young adolescents, but either newly married couples or first-time parents, but they're not all formally married, given the context in Kinshasa where they're mostly cohabiting partners and they probably have a marriage at a later stage in their lives. So that's one thing that I can share. But the second one is interim, kind of findings in Nigeria is showing a significant uptake of family planning methods among Muslim communities. Again, young, first-time parents or newly married couples, young adolescents in that sense. Even though it's within a, kind of the framing of a cohabiting couple relationships, it's still with young adolescents in that sense or latter stages of adolescence. These are really encouraging and positive findings that we could, share, that by working with religious leaders, communities, and approaches, and as they understand on this process, we could actually see their behavior around family planning, uptake and knowledge, addressing these conceptions, leading to uptake in family planning services. So I think that's kind of what I could share here.
Thank you very much. Apart from all other strategies that we talked about in advocacy in Uganda for increased dialogue and collaboration, we formed what we call an interfaith alliance for family planning at national level, and we are replicating that. Actually, it's now going to go beyond family planning, but deal with all reproductive health issues. It's kind of an in-house platform where other partners and other stakeholders are invited, and we provide the resources. We work with other partners, and they dialogue and agree on a number of issues. So this has been very, very key, on top of hand-holding, training, mentoring, and providing information. And we formed this in one of the districts where we've piloted, but we're expanding now, beginning the next month. We've even what we are called, we formed adolescent healthy, interfaith adolescent healthy networks. These networks bring together religious leaders, interfaith youth networks, civil society, and other partners, so that there's a functional framework. And we've also now going sexuality adolescent health framework with a clear roadmap and actions of what should be done after getting evidence on the issues so address. Thank you.
Fatu, you are muted.
As far
as we're concerned, it is the work at the level of the religious leaders that was important. Once we created this mobilization, the population would go see all the religious councils and present their arguments, saying, okay, we have this argument that describes clearly what Islam says about family planning, to show that it is not in opposition with religion. We also have within a network on the Friday preachers, they encourage imam from all the regions of Senegal. The day the mosques receive so many people on the preachers of the Friday, there is an argument on family planning that is discussed and is presented by the imams to their community of faithful. this has had an impact, a tremendous impact on the faithful. That is what I wanted to say, the impact we've had through those Friday moments.
Thank you, Fatu. These are wonderful examples. So we're coming near the top of the hour, and I want to ask just one last question. If each of the speakers could quickly summarize, what do you think are the most important lessons that you've learned about engaging religious leaders and implementing faith-based programs? And I'd like to start with Fatu.
Certainly. I believe that what we learned is that religious leaders have to be taken into account from the beginning, even in the formulation of projects and programs. If we involve them right at the beginning, it works. Otherwise, it won't work. If they are taken into account from the start, they feel involved, they feel implicated. And at that point, we are equal partners in the implementation and the success of the projects and programs.
Thank you. One of the key lessons, that I mean, I'll just mention again, one interfaith approach. They need to move as an interfaith team because at the end of the day, the issues being addressed, the young people, the entire healthy sector. And once you don't allow them to move together, to work together, then the controversies happen and misinterpretation. So it's another approach of cohesion, building cohesion among the different faiths and creating relationships. When we started programming, they could not, for example, Muslims meet at a church or Christians go into a mosque, but we don't hire venues anymore because there's a relationship and understanding. Those who don't have vehicles, when they're moving up country, you find other Christians maybe getting onto the Muslim vehicle leader and they move for a meeting. That was called haram. How can a Christian come onto a Muslims? But there's a relationship, there's cohesion, because they know that the issues being dealt with are beyond religion, are beyond faith. Common position, and again, our common position and consensus on most of these contradicting issues. In Uganda, we have 4 policies that are all on hold because religious leaders have not agreed, and particularly access of family planning to young people. But we are working around it. We've worked with the Ministry of Education and Health and given them strategies to involve them so that they agree on the language and they give their position. These include adolescent health, school health, sexuality framework, SRHR, policy. They are all on hold. And there's the voice of religious leaders that is required. So we've given them strategies, we've built their capacity, we provided evidence, and that's very, very important. So when you don't agree, they will leave you, and that's what they did here in Uganda. They started the design of these policies, review, and they left them towards the launch. They came and hammered them, and it was all over the media. So it's very important that they seek consensus. Capacity building, I cannot emphasize that. To me, that's a bulletproof, because you need to change their mindset, you need to provide information, you need to provide knowledge. Having a platform where they are comfortable is 2 approaches. Some of these interfaith approaches are in-house. So when they are discussing sensitive issues before we go out, they invite into their own platforms, coalitions, and we first agree. And then there are platforms that are with for other advocates and other implementers, then they join, but when they're already equipped. So having their own in-house discussion, their own platform where they are comfortable, where they'll fight, agree, and disagree is very important before they go to disagree. The other key is making sure that you marry, I'll even use the word marry media and faith-based institutions. Because if you don't do that, any statement that is given and is contradicting, they will run away. They will not come for these events again. They will not come for programming. So what we've done, we've identified healthy journalists, media, personnel who we train. We again work with them just like adolescents so that they understand their language, they agree, and it has worked so well. Even when they are misinterpreted, they don't feel so offended. They come back and say next time, you need to do this very well. You've seen some of this, like one of our very first champions, the current Archbishop of Uganda. He was saying there's need to use contraception, there's need to address issues of teenage pregnancy, we cannot hide anymore. And it was all over global news. And he was okay, because they've realized that the media, by the way they write it, it's the same message, but they write it in a way that is not offensive. It's the same message, but they've understood them. And finally, collaboration and coordination. Because if you don't, religious leaders still are not very comfortable working with, I even use the word they use, secular organizations. So as a way of bringing them together, you're also trying to create a relationship between the faith leaders, the faith-based organizations, and the other stakeholders, so that there is no phobia. In Uganda, when we invite them, now they even have to first come back to us and say, what does this content mean? Is it safe for us to go? Will they understand us? We don't want them to feel that we own them. We are moving towards opening them up. When we go in a particular area and build champions of adolescent health, of family planning, any partner who goes in that area should be able to work with them openly. So enhancing collaboration and partnerships between different stakeholders. Thank you.
Thank you, Jackie. And Prabhu, final words?
Yeah, just to say, I mean, acknowledging that they're not the magic bullet. I mean, there are challenges. I think it's really important to acknowledge that there are going to be challenges. And starting with the commonalities is really important. Can you hear me? I think my screen is... Hello?
We can hear you, Prabhu.
Okay, sorry. And also, I guess, important to understand, as much as there's a distrust between the development community and faith communities as well. So I think it's about how do you bridge that distrust by agreeing on mutually agreed principles and common goals that we want to work in. I think it's really important to acknowledge that. Process is important. You know, we can't shortcut the process to get the outcome that we want. Sometimes it is a longer term strategy as opposed to a quick win. I think it's really important to manage our expectations while we work on this so that we are not, impatient in the process itself. I think that for us, the deeper the process, I think the more meaningful the outcome has been. And it's taken, many years to be where we are at. So I think it's really important. I think those are kind of key things that I would say. Maybe this is a priority for us. They do not see this as a priority for them at the moment in most communities. So I think it's really important to acknowledge that our starting points are very different and start with where we are and they are at and start the process from there.
Thank you, Prabhu, Fatu, and Jackie for a wonderful conversation. There will be a blog summarizing some of the key points, and the recordings will be available. So we really appreciate all of the engagement from the audience and the wonderful knowledge and experience that our panelists shared today.
Thank you all so much for joining us today. We hope you'll join us for the next session. Our next session will be on December 2nd at 7 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, and we'll be discussing partners. And we also hope that you'll follow along with Knowledge Success and FB 2020. On the next slide, you'll see a few handles that you can join us at. And we really hope you'll continue those discussions there, as well as, get up to date and stay up to date on adolescent and youth reproductive health. Thank you all so much for joining us. We hope you have a great rest of your day wherever you are, and we will see you next time. Thank you.
Bye.